Hey, welcome to your next best step with Brek, the locker room for purpose-driven leaders. This is where we slow down, reflect, and we take our next best step through real stories, practical strategies, and rooted leadership wisdom. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, even the best leaders need a coach in their corner. Well, hey, welcome to your next best step podcast. This is the Leaders Locker Room, where we slow down, take a breath, talk about real things, real conversations, and just trying to help us take our next best step. And so today, I'm excited about a guest that I'm having on today. This month, I'm having all guests from the Below. I am not originally from Buffalo, but we moved here in 2001, and it's officially home. But today's guest is someone who's built her entire life work around something we talk about all the time in this locker room, that nothing meaningful happens until trust is in the room. Ekua Mends-Aidoo, yes, is the founder and president of Clementine Gold Group, a full-service strategy planning, community engagement firm, helping organizations do some of the hardest, most necessary work of our time, building cultures where every voice is actually heard, every person actually belongs, and real change actually takes root. Her approach is grounded, hands-on, and relentlessly people first. She doesn't consult from a distance. She gets right in the room, earns trust, meets people where they are, and does the work with them, not just for them. With roots in urban planning and deep experience across government, education, healthcare, nonprofit spaces, Ekua has seen what it costs when organizations ignore culture and what becomes possible when they finally decide to take it seriously. In a moment when the pressure on culture shapers inside organizations and outside has never been higher, she's exactly the kind of leader this locker room was made for. So, Ekua, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and chat with you.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, your
Yeah.
roots. Like, tell us a little backstory of Ekua before we jump into what you're doing today.
Yeah, well, I'll actually start with my name because a lot of folks will ask me, they see my name, Ekua, what does that mean? And so just to give you some background on me, Ekua actually means born on Wednesday, and that comes from the Akan language in Ghana, and that's where my dad is from. And so my dad was born and raised in Ghana. My mom is African American, and so she allowed my dad to name us, and he took it from a traditional route. But I often talk about my background because it really grounds me in terms of how I approach the work. Principles of things like Sankofa, which means, we look back to see, what happened in the past in order to shape us in terms of where we move forward. And so, born and raised in Syracuse, New York. So I
Okay.
wasn't, didn't grow up in Buffalo, but I came to Buffalo in 2004 for school and I never left. I made Buffalo home. In terms of my background, I went to the university at Buffalo, studied exercise science, health and wellness. I was dissecting cadavers and doing neuroanatomy and neuroscience, and got into that space and realized, you know what, I don't want to be a clinician the rest of my life. And so, my first role out of school, I actually did an internship with the city of Buffalo. And the mayor at the time was Mayor Byron Brown, was working in the Division of Citizen Services as an internship, and then they hired me full on right out of school. So it was in the city, got to know city government, but what I really got to know and love was the people of Buffalo, right?
Yeah.
And so connecting with people, block clubs, civic associations, really gave me a heart for the people and a heart for this place, and it became home from then.
Wow. It Buffalo for for people who've not lived here, they maybe they hear about it on, on the evening news, and Al Roker's talking about another snowstorm coming into
Right?
Buffalo, or you know, um, I know that my wife, she is third generation West Palm Beach. She's a Florida girl,
Okay.
and she loves Buffalo. I mean,
Yeah.
this is like she goes, I cannot see moving back to Florida. She
Hmm.
loves the beach. She gives up a lot
Yeah.
of her Florida comforts to live in Buffalo, especially at this time of the year. But there is something unique about the city and the
Hmm.
people. What like how do you describe it? Like what is it that's kind of the secret
Yeah.
sauce that makes people like,
You know, it's funny because they talk about Buffalo being the city of good neighbors. And I think you see a certain level of grit in the folks who,
mm,
are from here. And so people who band together, when things happen, I can think about, the most recent snowstorm. I think it was 2022,
yeah,
where even in tragedy, you saw folks coming together and
unbelievable.
banding together and
Yeah.
helping people out. And so I think there's a certain grittiness of the people here. We've gone through all types of different cycles here from an economic standpoint, and stops and fits and starts and fits. But, I would say that it's a place where, if you're intentional about what it is that you're trying to do or build, you can really create space for yourself. And that's something that, has happened for me and a lot of the folks that I know who have chosen to stay here. It's a place where you complain because obviously the cold weather does get annoying after a while, but I also think it's an affordable place that you can live as well. So I travel often. I get my fixes of,
Yeah.
warmth, and, then I can come back and feel grounded and still got some money in my pocket because, it's a more affordable place to
Yeah.
live. So I think it's a balance of that for me.
We met, I mean, it's probably been 10 years or so ago.
Probably, yeah.
And you were a part of an organization, and I just remember our interaction.
Hmm.
You were just very impressive. You went there, went to another organization,
Hmm.
uh, saw success there. And I've just kind of watched you kind of go from spot to spot, at least for the last 10 years or so. And
Yeah.
then watching you kind of create this new entity called Clementine Gold Group.
Yeah.
Could you share with us a little bit about what that is and the work that you guys do?
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to start again with the name, right? And the meaning behind that because there's importance there. And so
Yeah.
Clementine is my grandmother on my maternal side. She's now passed away about 10 years ago,
Mm.
this past August. And so it's an ancestral nod to my grandmother, who's, she was the matriarch of our family. Every grandchild that she had felt like we were the favorite grandchild. She was that type of woman in person. And so I wanted to do something that honored her because I had heard the saying where someone passes away twice, right? Once in the flesh, and the second time is the last time, like the last time that their name is spoken out loud. And so for me, this was a way to continue her legacy and her name. Every time someone mentions Clementine, it gives me joy because it evokes her, right? In terms of what she meant to me and my family. Gold represents the Gold Coast. I already talked about, my dad, that side, and so that's Ghana side. And so this whole thing was an ancestral nod, and it's because people have always taught me that you have to make sure that you're giving and, giving back and making sure that you're leaving something better than you found it. And so when I think about Clementine Gold Group and what we stand for, like our major value as a company is from the margin to the center. And that's making sure that we create spaces that bring people who are generally at the margins and under-resourced and underutilized, and from a different vantage point closer to the center because they have the solutions that we're looking for. And so, we are an economic development agency. I would say we're community-led economic development agency, and we have two different arms. One is really on engagement and public participation, and the other is within organizational development. And so, in these spaces, we work with business owners, we work with leaders within businesses, companies, organizations, from healthcare to government to nonprofit, where we really help them with cultural alignment in their organization, whether that's through strategic planning, helping them create the type of culture and connection to the values that they state they have. And on the other side of that, there's more of this external community engagement where we work on, things from infrastructure projects, making sure that the community is focused and centered in the conversations that are happening around them. We do a lot of work with construction engineering firms where we make sure that the public is included and involved in anything that might disrupt them. And so, infrastructure projects, transportation, creating more affordable and more cleaner options for Buffalo's East Side. We've done a lot of projects in that space. But yeah, we love to engage people and bring them along the process and make sure that they're centered in the conversation because they often have the solutions that we're looking for.
I love that. You came to renovation on occasion, right? So
Yeah.
for listeners, I was a pastor of a church. We on in the northeast or the northwest corner of
Hmm.
Buffalo, Riverside, Black Rock area, and and people often don't know this, I don't know what the current spot is,
Hmm.
but when we launched renovation, Buffalo was the second poorest city in America,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there's 81 zip codes in Erie County, and our zip code 207 was
Hmm.
tied for second poorest zip code, like with three other zip codes.
Hmm.
So here we are, and here I am. I am so far. You talk about out of my comfort level league.
Yeah.
Like it was one of those things. Like, God, what? Where? Why have you done this? Like, why? I don't think you got the right person to be here. And one of the things that really helped me was partnering up with an organization called CCDA,
Hmm.
Christian Community Development Association, and Dr. John Perkins, and from Mississippi, Mendenhall, Mississippi, and Wayne Gordon, um, up in Chicago land. And one of the things, the first time I went to their conference, their national conference in 2008, October, and my world was so turned upside down
Hmm.
in those 3 days that it's never been the same. Like
Okay.
like there was BC before that and BC after that. And it so changed my worldview, my theological view.
Hmm.
But at the center of CCDA is what you just said, that Jesus came, and whether you're a Jesus follower or not,
Hmm.
he came and he made the margins. He put the margins at the center of his
Yeah.
concern.
Yeah.
And that's what made all the higher ups always upset, because they couldn't get to him. Like, the margins was always the closest to Jesus. And
Hmm.
it was one, and that really helped frame. And so when we started to, like, okay, how are we going? What's our approach? What's our strategy? How are we going to like do this church? And we simply said, I don't know about a lot of things, but I do know that we're going to put the neighborhood, the people who walk here, at the center of our concern.
Yeah.
And so we said we have walkers, riders, and drivers. So people who walk to the church close enough, those who got on a bus and rode there, and then those who had the power and like the upper mobility to drive there, then they were third in line.
Hmm.
And so to hear what you were saying about that, about what you guys do with Clementine, I love that approach. How, like, what was it like? I mean, before Clementine, like before you that like launched that, what were you seeing in organizations or in the community that made you said someone needs to do something about this? And I think it's got to be me. Kind of like, what was the gap? What were you seeing time and time again that said, I can't.
Hmm.
work anymore for another organization. I'm going to have to create an organization.
Yeah, I think, I think that we would often see like things being planned around people. I think that was a pretty consistent thing that I would see, and it was kind of the same pattern everywhere. You might be incredibly well intentioned to designing maybe an organization or a specific project that would impact community, but ultimately it would miss the mark because the people who are most impacted by those decisions were never at the table, right? And it was something that I would consistently see in my work. And that's why it's such an interesting like dynamic in terms of like the organizational development piece because you see that within organizations, right? Like leaders creating whether it's systems or processes and procedures and ways about doing things without always consulting those who are most impacted, your employees.
Right.
But then also on the other side of that, within the community, the built environment, how things are designed and infrastructure is put in place, we're not always considering, those who are most impacted. And so what you also described with your church and how you thought about the walkers first, and then, those who got on the bus and then those who drove, we would consider that a part of like the curb cut effect, which came out of like the ADA realm. So the American Disabilities Act came out. And if you think about sidewalks, right, this is before the ADA was really a thing. They did these curb cuts, and that's so that people who are challenged with, physical mobility, right, could access the curb and get onto the sidewalk. But guess what? In doing that, and creating this solution for those who are most at the margin, other people benefited. If you think about your suitcase when you're rolling it up to get on a curb from the street, you're using that. Maybe a dolly if you're unloading a truck or a car or van to get on the sidewalk. And so I think those were the types of things that we were seeing where it's just something that, you didn't think about, but if you can solve for those who are at most disadvantaged, everybody else is going to benefit. And that's just the approach that we've taken in terms of our work. So I would say that's probably the problem that we would see often within organizations and within, the community as well.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about like, man, it's just, I do work with leaders in different
Hmm.
organizations, and I it was something that I was oblivious to
Hmm.
till it was pointed out to me. Like I was so used to kind of seeing leadership as, I was a basketball coach for 15 years before I
Okay.
stepped into ministry, right? So, I when the guys walked into the locker room, I wasn't asking them, "Hey, what kind of offense do you run? What kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
defense do you run?" I'm telling them, "This is the kind of offense we're running. This is the kind of defense you're running, right? And if you want to get, if you want to play, then you're going to do it my way, right?"
Hmm. Hmm.
And that, I guess it works, in a sports setting, but when it came to, and I believe that there's a leader that there needs to be a vision, it needs to be
Hmm.
clear, but so many times um we miss as leaders bringing people along. It's our vision, not their vision.
Yeah.
It's my vision.
Yeah.
And when we say, hey, and so often, and I saw this, you know, sitting at the table with
Hmm.
you. I first started seeing, and there was a group of pastors coming around from the
Hmm.
east side and the west side, and um, and so often I was watching these pastors of color who were amazing leaders, doing
Hmm.
amazing things. Some of them were, you know, working, plus pastoring, something like it was a whole mix. But what I saw was here are men, specifically, it was mostly men,
Hmm.
leaders of color who were still trying to um not that they should have been having to prove that they belong at a table.
Yeah.
and it began to really help me understand so much about like, wow, there has to be there should be a space where you're not asking me to come and you already have the plan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've already got 90% of it, and you basically want either my what I can leverage for your good,
Right.
or if you're there and you sign off on it, that's going to make it seem better.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rare place where you walk in and a leader goes, "Hey, this is open-handed. I've got some thoughts, I got some
Right.
vision, but I'd really like for us to collaborate because I'd love to hear what you think about this and what you think about this and what your experience has been to help shape and maybe together,
Mm-hmm.
because we often say, together we're better." And I think it's true, but I just don't know, Akua, sometimes how much of the together we are really.
And I mean,
And
you
I,
see that you definitely see that even in organizations and especially doing like this equity related work where folks are like, oh, we want to hire for, diverse perspective or backgrounds and, bringing people together. But what you would find is, yeah, we're hiring you for your diverse perspective and thought process. But when you get in here, we're going to beat you into assimilation where you have to be, like us. And then you start to create this groupthink and yes people. And so it's easier said than done, right? Like it's easier said to say, okay, we want to bring in these perspectives, but guess what? That means that you have to stop and pause and allow those perspectives to contribute to the process and listen to them. And I think, oftentimes you'll see people who are brought into a process, but like you said, we already have the vision and thought of what needs to happen. And so we just need you to, basically sign off on this versus we're going to allow you to pick this apart or challenge us. Um, bring criticism and feedback and a thought process. And I think in leadership, when you're really trying to do this, you have to center humility, right? You have to be humble and know I might have some thoughts around, how this should go, but I have to be open to the feedback and being challenged into a different position. And oftentimes we know when you bring all those different perspectives, the end result is going to be that much better because it's been challenged, it's been poked, it's been prodded. But it does take I think it takes some practice to get
yeah,
into that position in place where you're allowing others to be a part of the larger process. And you're not just trying to push your idea ahead in terms of whatever that process might be.
yeah. I have I am I describe myself. People say, what do you do?" People go, they hear coach, like, "Are you coaching basketball again?" I'm like, "No,
Yeah, yeah.
there's other forms of coaching, right?" I said, "No, I've come to this. I'm a value-centered
Hmm.
leadership development coach."
Okay.
And I want to help because part of it is you know we're on this journey, right? And so the
Hmm.
things that impact you, you start to like, oh wow, maybe that can help others, right? And so when I was coaching in high school, college, everything is outcome based.
Hmm.
At the end of the season, you see coaches at a coaches meeting, and they're like, "Hey, how'd the season go?" Which is code is, "Tell me what your record is."
Yeah, yeah.
And if it was a good season, you're like, "Oh man, we were 20 and 8. It was good." If it was a 10 and 20, you're like, "Well, we had a good group of guys, you know." And so, you know, but I I think for us, for leaders, because this is what this podcast is for
Hmm.
leaders, right? And we spend so much time thinking about, dreaming about, positioning about outcomes that
Hmm.
we spend very little time um, in what it means to be value centered, rooted,
Yeah, yeah.
grounded, right? And so what would be a couple of values that you orient to that for leaders to the work that you're doing? What would be a few values that you like, hey, this is really important that you carry this into every space that we're walking into?
Yeah, well, I think I named, like humility is
Mm,
is a big one for me. And I think as leaders, you have to put yourself in the shoes of other people that, aren't your own, right? And so when you do that and you allow yourself to come out of that leadership, because I think there's oftentimes this authority and, hierarchy that comes from being in a leadership seat in a leadership role. But if you remove that and you kind of position that to the side and you say, you know what, how does whatever decision I'm going to make impact the people that I'm leading? That often is going to point you in the right, or at least towards the right direction, because it removes, ego out of that,
mm,
right? Or at least it dampens that and lessens that ego. So I would say definitely centering humility. I'll always say that, right, from the margin to the center, because oftentimes just the way, whether it's societal, historical nuances that exist within our own cultures today, there's a certain way that things are done. There's norms, there's values, and in those norms, there's biases that are baked into those norms. So how people even come into position, how, someone's even come into a specific space of authority, there's some challenges that we have to kind of think about and kind of embrace as we do this work. And so when you think about bringing someone from the margin to the center, this person might have great ideas. They might come with a whole host of experience and skill sets, but because they're not centered in the conversation for whatever reason, those thoughts aren't allowed through. And so I would say, wherever possible, like ask questions. If people are quiet around a table, I often try to create space for them to lean in and say, "Hey, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts about that?" And just trying to make sure that people are included in a decision process, and even to build consensus around something before a decision is fully made. So those are things that I would push leaders to think about. How do you remove some of that ego that you might have so that others can
mm.
kind of step into their own authority and their own skill and experience? Because lived experience sometimes will always beat out whatever you might learn in a book, right?
Yeah.
And so the work that we do with communities, that's often the case. You might not have a specific degree or some type of certification, but you have the certification of lived experience, right? And so you know best how this has impacted you and how this is something that might change your own future as well.
Akua, I mean, we're living in some crazy times, and I mean, this is the work you do in,
Mhm.
diversity, equity, inclusion. Um, why does that still matter?
That's a great question. In terms of why that still matters, I would say for a variety of different reasons, right? Because, and I mean, we can lean into this conversation a little bit because I think it's been challenged. I think throughout the whole history of this country even being formed, right? So this is not new. It's
Right.
new to us and it's a new experience for a lot of us. But when you study history and you go back, you see that every generation has had their own challenges and what that looks like. I will say that why this still matters is because our country is shifting and it's being shaped
Mm,
every single year, right? And I think about even the demographic breakup and makeup of our country, and what that's going to look like in even another 10 and 20 years.
yeah.
That is shifting and that's changing, right? We know that we live in a plurality, which means there won't be a single ethnic or racial majority come 2044, and that's already happening in certain places. In Buffalo, for instance, we've already started to shift there. Like I think the percentages is like 47% white and 53%, people of color who now live in our communities. We know by 2060, based on U.S. Census data, the Latinx community is going to triple in size. And so, what does that look like and what does that mean? And so, these shifts are happening whether folks like it or not. And you have to embrace what that looks like as it relates to, I come from a healthcare background. So even in healthcare, what does that mean? What does culturally competent care mean? And how do we get people healthy and living full and long lives? I think it also shapes and shifts how we think about leadership and what that looks like. Women in leadership roles and what that might mean. And so, although I think there's been challenges to like the societal norms of how we have these conversations, it's still important and it still is going to be there whether we like it or not. And so you either get on, this notion of needing to have more inclusive organizations and inclusive communities, or you're going to have to try to rush and chase that down the line. I mean, for anybody who has a business, who wants to make money, you have to think about what your customer base looks like, and you have to be ahead of that at all times. And if you're not, you're going to be chasing that, and you won't have a successful business. So even people who want to, whether you have a gadget that you're selling, you need to make sure that you're understanding what the market looks like, and that market is changing on a regular basis. So I'd say it's always been important. Obviously, there's been challenges and folks who are saying, "Oh, this doesn't matter anymore," but it's going to continue to matter. It's just a matter of whether you pay attention or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a segment, there's a population that would like to just go, hey, we don't have to worry about, we don't want to think about it. But that's
Yeah,
just not reality.
it's
And
not.
whether it's mandated by government or not,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, everything it's about people,
Hmm.
and people matter.
Right.
You know, people are valuable, and we we need to pay attention
Hmm.
to, to one of the things that I mean, this just kind of shows some of my like naiveness, right?
Hmm.
So, I grew up in Kansas City. My dad was a pastor, very conservative. I grew up in a very like a bubble.
Yeah.
Like we were Republican, we're Midwest, conservative. I love America. I remember
Hmm.
going, I was 13 in 1776. Like it was a big deal. Like,
Yeah.
like I remember the 200th anniversary. It's 250. Like, oh my gosh, I'm getting old, right? But it was a big, and so there were a lot of things that I was just really certain about.
Hmm. Hmm.
And when it wasn't, I was, in my mid 40s
Yeah.
when I came to Buffalo to launch to work with renovation and start this thing. So I am by that point I am very certain.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did not have much curiosity, right? And it was that CCDA conference that all of a sudden changed some perspectives. And
Hmm.
then we'd have my hope was that we'd have people who looked like the community be in
Right.
leadership, right? And
Right.
so it wasn't just all white. And so I'll never forget my Julia Spencer, who led all of our music and
Hmm.
worship and all of that. We were having this conversation in the office, and I made this statement. I said, well, that's just, I forget what song it was. Like, and I'm like, that song, you grew up in church, you know what I'm talking about. And Julius looked at me and he goes, I've never heard that song. I'm like, Julius, you have too. You have
Right.
heard this. Everybody has heard this song. And he said, B, I've never heard that song. And then he said, all right, have you ever heard this song?
Hmm.
Everybody in the black church knows this song. No, I ain't never heard that song. And it was one of those like moments for me that
Mhm.
you'd think at this point in my life, it shouldn't be an aha. But it was one of those things that I started to realize like how many spaces, how many things
Mm.
have I just assumed that this is how everybody's
Universal.
life
Yeah.
experience is, and this is what everybody,
Yeah.
right? And it began to really put me on kind of a more of a curiosity. And I've been
Hmm.
like, one of my three values is top three values is curiosity.
Hmm.
BC leadership is be curious,
Hmm.
right? It's so it's not just my name, it's what I say, hey, be curious. And so I think often we assume, and so often, whether it's white, black, brown, we
Hmm.
assume that other ethnic or cultural experiences are kind of basically the same.
Right.
And I think some of the work, like in the work that you're doing, when you come up against that,
Hmm.
right? And the power seat is somebody, maybe it's a, white led. There's a lot of white led organizations, agencies in the city of Buffalo.
Hmm.
Um, but there's a lot of people of color who are in those organizations.
Hmm.
And so often, the top of the food chain gets to win. Like
Right.
I get to determine. I don't need to be curious. I don't have to be inclusive. Like when you're butting up against that kind of like issue,
Yeah.
how do you navigate and facilitate that within organizations?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because that it makes me think about there's this, and I have to remember who put this together. I want to say that the last name is Timoon, but there's like 10 dominant cultural norms within organizations that will often challenge people to think through. And like I said before, when you're in that position of authority and power, that often comes with you, right? And a lot of times it's something that you're not even thinking about, right? Like it's a specific bias that you might carry. But things like, perfectionism and what that looks like from a dominant cultural norm. There's values like paternalism that people just often kind of fall into. Progress at the speed of a business versus kind of waiting and having a more even-tempered way of your work and what you're doing. And so these dominant cultural norms are things that we challenge people to think about as it relates to their own culture and what they're kind of pushing forward and permeating within their own organizations. And so oftentimes I would say when you're coming up against that, the people they're going to tell you what that looks like, right? And so your people are going to be loud about that and say, listen, I'm all for progress, but this tempo of the work is killing us, right? Like we're burnt out. We're struggling in that. And so you'll hear people kind of challenge that nuance as it relates to their work. And so these are things that leaders might not even think about on a regular basis, but I'll have to send this to you after so you can maybe link it so folks
Yeah,
can hear about it. But it's like, some of it is white supremacy culture, it's dominant cultural norms, and these are things that, like you said, if you're not curious or you're not, poking yourself to kind of think differently, you just kind of naturally fall in line with that. And I think what's considered professional is sometimes in that same vein too. And so we have to kind of deconstruct what that culture looks like and think about what you want people to do within your organization. You want them to ultimately succeed. And so how do you create this culture and this pace of the work? How do you make sure that there's a balance in terms of how people approach their work, right? I think we saw that during COVID, where a lot of people said, you know what? This pause has allowed me to see just how unhealthy this culture is.
yeah,
And now I want this hybrid type of work schedule because being in the office is killing me. And you would see that within a lot of organizations. You would see different statistics around even people of color and how much they appreciated being more at home than having to deal with the nuances of what that looked like within an organization that didn't really consider them, right? So I think these are all things that people need to be thinking about and creating the most wholesome and inclusive organization possible.
yeah. Um, my number one value when I'm working with leaders, but just for me personally,
Hmm.
and it's not something. It's I think it's come out of brokenness too, but it's trust. I say
Mm.
it this way: EDOT. Everything depends on trust.
Hmm.
that trust is the soil that all good things grow out of.
Hmm.
And I know when I look back, I know I've made decisions
Mm.
that have caused me regret because I broke trust. I
Yeah.
didn't I didn't initially intend to break trust, but that's
Hmm.
what happened, right? I don't know that most people intend to break trust, but
Yeah.
it's not our intention, but it's our attention that gets us where we want to go, right? And so
Hmm.
if we want to have a culture, a family, a business, a church that's built on trust versus suspicion,
Mm.
then we have to do certain things. And trust is never a destination. It's always a journey. We don't get
Right.
to the top of the mountain of trust and then we get to just like, okay, I arrived.
Stop.
I don't have to do any more work. No.
Right. Right.
So and I know that you do a lot of work in within organizations on actually building trust.
Hmm. Hmm.
When when a leader or an organization has broken trust within an organization. So it could be, a leader, it could be a manager, it
Yeah.
could be the CEO, it could be the vice president, the department chair, like, but the value stated on the wall
Hmm.
somehow didn't get down the hall
Yeah.
and trust was broken. How do you facilitate, how do you go in and rebuild trust when there's so much suspicion that then
Hmm.
comes with it?
Yeah, I think, and that's a great question. We often talk about it, and Dr. Latice Hairston, she's done a lot of work in this space. She's a local person
Oh yeah,
who does a lot of this great work, but
yeah.
she talks about it from a reference of like rupture and repair, right? And
Mm,
so when trust is broken, there's a rupture that happens. And she likens it to this like, you have a beautiful teacup. Maybe it's a beautiful china, like a teacup that has dropped, and you have all these different pieces that were kind of laying around. And so this rupture has occurred, and you notice, this trust has now been broken in relation to the teacup. And you have to be intentional in putting those pieces back together, but you also realize that that cup no longer looks the same as it
mm,
did once it first started. And so there's a recognition there, that it's not the same, but you do have to take those little bits and pieces, those little moves along the way to rebuild that. And so there's a lot of organizations where that trust is questioned, that trust is broken. Maybe there's something that happened. We've worked with organizations who had to restructure, or maybe they had to lay people off, and now there's this suspicion, to your point, where it's like, well, dang, we came here, we've been giving our all, and we've been showing up every single day, and now I don't feel safe. And often that's kind of where that trust starts to lose that focus, is as a matter of safety or psychological safety, where something has happened. Now I don't feel like I can show up in my full self. And I would say that to build trust, it takes intention and consistency, right? Because people are already going to be questioned, like, oh, well, I saw what happened over there. And so now I'm almost anticipating, that other shoe falling or something happening. And so to build that, you have to be consistent. It's just like any relationship dynamic, right? Like even in your own relationships, say, you're married or partnered, and something happens, and there was a letdown that has happened. You now have to build that up over time. That has to come with consistency. I need to say you change behavior. I need to see that you're continuing to do what you said you were going to do, and there's consistency there. And that's what happens within organizations as well. And so leaders who might, even if you inherit that type of organization, you have to know that it's going to first take time, that people aren't just going to believe you just because you say something, and your follow through becomes even more important,
mm.
after that China has now broken and is in a million different pieces, right? And so I think a lot of that is your own awareness and how you're showing up in rooms, when you're coming into rooms, acknowledging things, because oftentimes as leaders, you try to brush things under the rug, like, I don't need to address this and we can just move beyond it. But until you repair that rupture, it's
Yeah.
going to be in the back of people's heads, right? And so it's naming it. It's coming in a room and saying, hey, I know this, we dropped the ball here. You're acknowledging it, you're accepting your fault in something that has happened, and saying, we dropped the ball, but this is what we're going to do to repair this. And I
Mm.
want you to keep me honest in that, right? You're a part of this trust. We want you to, be vocal about what's happening. And so I think it takes time, but with intentionality behind it, and being honest and open. We're all human. We're
Yeah.
all going to drop the ball at some point in time. But just making sure that people feel confident that you're going to do what you said you were going to do. There's real importance in that to maintain that trust over time too.
Yeah. Uh, One of the reasons why I believe it's important to be a value centered leader
Hmm.
person is it allows you to be predictable in the best ways.
Yeah.
You're not scrambling what I call for you're when we get a no or a maybe and we're
Hmm.
asking for a yes, we get in a scramble mode. And so we'll chase and hustle for an outcome to get a yes.
Yeah.
If we're value centered and we know who we are, this is how I'm going to show up.
Hmm.
It keeps us from getting in that scramble mode. It keeps us from getting into that chasing and hustling and kind of being whatever I need that room for me to that room makes says I need to be this, so I'm going to be that, right? I love the fact that what you talk about is naming it,
Hmm.
acknowledging it, not dismissing it, not defending it, which is really hard as a human being.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but I know that wasn't my intent, but da 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 da, right?
Right. Right.
And you know, are you do you have you read much of Brene Brown stuff? Like
Yeah, I think she talks about like shame as a part of those conversations and what that looks like.
vulnerability, shame,
Yeah, and leadership for sure. For
yeah,
sure.
and being able to actually get in the hole,
Hmm.
not just look down in it, but get in it, sit there, hold space.
Yeah.
That's just so hard for leaders who are so programmed to like, okay,
You don't
you,
want to fail.
no, you don't want to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's so, but even more so in these spaces of cultural diversity,
Mm.
ethnicity, like there's so much trauma, the trauma loop
Hmm.
that has happened. And I think one of the things that is so interesting about our minds is that uh, whenever we walk into a space, the first question our mind is asking us is, "Am I safe?"
Hmm. Hmm.
And it doesn't fully function till it gets that answer with a yes.
Yeah.
We can't fully be our best selves
Hmm.
if we're not in a place that feels safe.
That's very true.
And how do you like what would you say to leaders to even think about like
Hmm.
this idea, like are you creating an environment experience that allows your employees to feel safe?
Hmm.
How do we do that as a leader? How do we even think about even like, oh, that shouldn't even be an issue?
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people want to believe that they have this certain culture or, like experience that people are all experiencing the same. And oftentimes we're not even asking ourselves those type of questions first and foremost, right? Like we just assume, okay, I
Mm,
haven't heard any issues, nothing's kind of rumbling, so everything must be good. And so I'm just gonna, be able to chill and sit back. But when we talk about culture, we're often saying that everybody has to own that, right? And so when you talk
mhm.
about values of an organization, everybody has to own that and emulate what those values are. But a lot of folks don't take the time, to your point, to even break that down. Say you have a culture or your value within a business or organization, you might name, how you go into a room and you see the values listed on the wall, like
Yeah,
respect, family
right.
first, like we respect diversity and these different perspectives. But do we take the time to sit back and actually define what that means and how do you operationalize what that means?
Yeah,
So if I see respect on the wall, what does that mean? Does that mean I come into a room and I don't have to greet someone, or, I'm not being friendly, or I'm not, open door policy. Like, what does that truly mean? And what doesn't that mean on the other side of that, as it relates to that respect? That means that I'm not going to come in or interrupt you, or, I'm going to allow you to speak. Like, we have to have real operational ways that this shows up in verbs and
Yeah.
action, in terms of what that looks like. And so
So
I
good.
would suggest that leaders, you have to define that. You have to define that for what it means for you as a leader, but then also define what that means as a leadership team. What does that mean for your supervisors and managers? And what does that mean for your individual line staff? Because oftentimes we just assume that people know what those values mean within an organization and how they should be carried out, but oftentimes it's not the case. And so, when it relates to culture, everyone owns that. I often talk about when we do like work with managers, we'll talk about like Attila the manager who's sitting in the room and they're shooting bow and arrows at everybody. And you see someone says, man, but they get results, right? And so they can act like that. But that also sets and shapes how the culture is.
Mm.
Just because someone might be effective at their job, if they're toxic in their environment and in the environment that they're creating, it's going to impact everybody. And if you don't address that, everybody is going to be impacted as well. And oftentimes you're not going to see the other side of that until someone says, you know what, I've had enough of this and I'm out of here.
Right.
And oftentimes that's too late, right? So you
Yeah.
need to be asking these questions up front. A lot of organizations will do like assessments, like satisfaction, employee satisfaction surveys. And the work that we do, we like to break that down.
Yeah.
Just because you get this survey doesn't mean that everybody, like the median score is 4 out of 5. But when you break that down into different demographics, you might see there's clusters within your organization that don't feel that way. So if you can get to the data and see, kind of what's happening within your organization, you'll have a better understanding of what might need to take place and at least give you a baseline for how you build on that year after year.
That's so good because I just know, those surveys go out, and when somebody has, year one, year two, year three, like, okay, I'll be a good team player and I'll fill
Right.
out the survey, I'll share, myself, and then year four, five, six, nothing ever changes.
Exactly.
Guess what? Who's
Exactly.
not filling out that survey anymore?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's the old head. It's people who've been like, no, it doesn't. So now you don't even have good intel.
Right. Right.
And I love the fact that you talked about like verbs, like the
Mm.
values. Smuckers, big, jelly,
Hmm.
like they changed. They had values for decades, and they were nouns.
Okay.
And then recently they turned their values into verbs,
Mm-hmm.
because if a value can't be a verb, then a value isn't a value. Like,
Right.
there's
Right.
behaviors that have to be attached to that.
Yep. Exactly.
And as leaders, wow, I love it. Akua, I mean, golly, we could. I love the fact that just what you're talking about. What would you say is the hardest part of the work you're doing that rarely gets kind of talked about publicly?
Hmm. I would say that a lot of people aren't going to just show their cards, right? Like, show the face of their cards right away. And so I would say one of the most difficult parts of this work is sometimes getting people to realize and accept the fact that they might have an issue or a challenge ahead of them, right? And so oftentimes, because of things like shame and because of wanting to be in the best position, we don't always lay those cards out to talk about the difficulties that we might have within our own spaces. And so, one of the things as a practitioner coming into a space is, an assessment, and people have to be honest and open about what's happening. But oftentimes, what we do to get around that is we do have focus groups where we're getting different layers and levels of people within an organization or within a community to give you feedback. To discuss that. And that is a process on our own that we have to come in and build trust very quickly within an organization and be consistent in the work that we're doing. And so I would say that. I would say the fact that things are shifting and shaping, within our current societal norms and what that looks like. If you were to ask me 6 years ago if I thought we'd be where we currently are, I don't know if I would have known that was the case, right? And so you always have to be kind of ahead of the curve in terms of how you approach this work. I would say that people are starting to come back around and saying, you know what, maybe we don't call it this, but we know we need it, right? We know we need this type of support within organizations and what that looks like. And I think we have to break down this work so that people understand what it truly means. So it's not just a couple different words on a page, but we talk about the actions and what you want on the other end of that. And that's sometimes difficult, but it's important to continue to push forward in this work for sure.
Yeah. Akua, this is a leadership podcast. Who's a leader who believed in you before you believed in yourself? Like one of those, like back in the day, somebody spoke life into you that you're like, what?
Yeah. Um, I mean, outside of my grandmother, well, I would say, she was probably one of those
Mm,
first people who always had just like the sage advice, right? And she was a Christian. She was someone who believed in the power of God, and she would often, anytime I would come to her with a challenge or an issue, she'd be like, "What's the Bible verse?" And that's Philippians 4:13, where she said, you need to in on that because you can do all things. And she spoke life into me in that way. I also had a doctor, Dr. Chinema, rest in peace. He passed away, I think, maybe last year. Uh, but he saw the leadership qualities in me kind of immediately
mm,
as a kid, right? And just recognize, oh, you're going to be a leader one day, and you're going to be someone who might lead people or lead, positions in organizations and communities. And outside of family, I would say that yeah, these are folks who just kind of notice different things when you were young that you might not even have noticed yourself. And then you kind of get into it and you're like, wow, they saw something that I might not have seen in myself.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so interesting when we look back, when we think about, because I mean, I know this is the type of person you're like, you want to be a life-giving person.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to be a life-sucking person. I don't want to
Right.
take like, I want to
Right.
walk in and I want to bring life into this space, into this
Hmm.
room. And and just being aware of that, but also looking back and going like there was certain people who saw even just little bits of encouragement
Yeah.
that maybe nobody else saw, and how far that goes
Yeah.
in kind of helping us take those next steps, right?
For sure. For sure.
What there's maybe there's a leader listening right now, and they care deeply about their people, their culture, but they're tired, they're uncertain, they're wondering, gosh, every time I try to step into this world about culture,
Hmm.
ethnicity, uh, you know, all of these things, um, and maybe their question is it worth it? Like, do I stay in the fight? Do I stay in this? What would you say to a leader like that? Whether it's at a mid management level, or maybe it's just a solo, or maybe it's a CEO type. What would you
Yeah.
say? How do you bring some encouragement to them?
I would think about the ultimate impact that they want to make within their work and their space. Oftentimes we get so bogged down in the weeds and the day to day that we often forget like the larger picture and notion of what it is that we're trying to change and challenge, right? And I think more so these days you're seeing that across the board where people are like, you know what, this is getting too hard. You maybe not have worked that muscle in a while that relates to grit and what it took for you to even get here in the first place, and so you find yourself kind of sometimes in this place of complacency or just exhaustion where you're asking yourself, why this is important. But I would question, why you got involved in the first place. What
Mm,
made you decide that this is something that you wanted to challenge? and test different theories and ways about getting to a specific outcome, and kind of finding that, right? Because I would say even when I was in healthcare directly, it'd be the story of the patients and their lives that we impacted that would give me more, you know, just hope and
Yeah.
more, of a notion to press on and move
Yeah.
forward, because I saw just that one person whose lives we were able to impact in a positive way. And so I would challenge people to get back to the root of why you started in the first place. I know for me, more recently, it's been going back in time from a historical knowledge standpoint and seeing the people who, when they didn't have a reason to move forward, they decided, you know what, we're going to continue. And if they didn't, a lot of us wouldn't be here in the positions that, we were able to start or, like thrive in. And so go back to a source of inspiration or something that really sparked your desire to make a change or, center the work that you're doing now, and kind of ground yourself in that, because, there are highs and lows in this work, no doubt about it. And I think in everybody's work, but you have to often decide to go back and kind of recenter yourself in the work in the first place. And so I believe in rest. I believe in, giving yourself the ability to pause. I didn't always believe in that. And I got to a place of exhaustion and burnout myself where I had to kind of fight back. And that fighting back came through rest and just pausing and, chilling and making sure that I had space for myself. And so if you have to do that, make sure that you're creating that type of space. And even if you're, meditating and finding a moment where you're just kind of centering the work and what you're doing, it's important that leaders, do that as well. And we don't often do that well as leaders. So, find the purpose and find that position of why you started first and foremost.
I love that. All right, this is a fun one. This is what we'll take away. So you're getting on a big stage. There's 10,000 people they're introducing you. What's your walk-up song? What's your theme
Ooh.
song? What's your walk-up song going to be?
Yeah, so I gotta shout out Jill Scott. Jill Scott is like my favorite, musician, artist, singer. She's a poet. She's a singer, but probably Golden by Jill Scott. Living my life like it's golden, right? Like it's
Okay.
such a positive song, but she talks about taking her freedom, taking it off the shelf, putting it on a chain around her neck,
Oh,
and
I
just
gotta
really
check that out.
centering that type of attitude, right?
Yeah.
Like you're in this position for a reason, and so own it, own the room, own your authority, own the work that you were called to do. And so yeah, I got to shout out Jill Scott. She just dropped the album uh on the 13th too, so it's new
Oh,
music out, and so I've been rocking to that, and it's
oh man, I
really
gotta
been
check that
positive.
out.
Yeah,
That'd be
yeah.
great. Well, hey, Akua, thank you for being on with us today. Leaders, it's another session in the locker room. Hey, keep tending to trust and curiosity, taking your next best step. We're in your corner. Before you go, share this episode with someone who might need it. We're on YouTube. Subscribe. Jump over to my website, bcleadershipco.com. You can get an email that I send out every Thursday called Throwdown Thursdays, leadership lessons rooted in scripture. But Coach, thanks for coming on and hanging out with us today. And listeners, until next time, have a great week. God bless.